Welcome back to another edition of Nain Shorts. Having fun here with new toys, literally a toy. But I had to distract myself from the gloomy thoughts in my head. I'm kidding, they're not really gloomy thoughts, but the last few episodes really had me thinking about okay, where do I go next with what I'm learning both in Kaju as well as with the Bladed Mind and IPC. What do I do when I personally feel, and this is where the gloomy thoughts come in, that I failed in what I was trying to accomplish during my black belt test? And it got me thinking, okay, I personally feel like I failed simply because I had way too high expectations of my own abilities, which means I am nowhere near as good as I imagined myself to be. So that aspect of it I've dealt with, and making sure that I remain conscious of my own, I guess, shortcomings. And really, where do I go from here? But it also got me thinking of how many times within the martial arts community you do well, you do well, you do well, and then you find yourself in a situation where all the stuff that you do really well, that have worked so many other times, all of a sudden don't. What do you do then? How do you recover from that? And as an instructor, do you simply tell the student, you did it wrong? Like, what does that really do to the student? And I only bring this up because it has happened. We've heard stories of people being told certain things, and then when they do them, they're told it's wrong. And while nobody has done that to me, even Rick himself will admit that there have been times where his intention being good, of wanting to give this student or me as a student the very best that he can for them to grow, they get a little ahead of themselves, and it becomes less about the students and more about themselves. And we've seen it with instructors from time to time where it is about them all of a sudden and not the student, not the art. And that really does a number on people's heads as to whether or not they even decide to stay with that particular school, with that particular discipline, because it really is a jarring thing. And how do we overcome that? How do we then bounce back from being so sure, having invested so much time and effort into an art, and then all of a sudden being wrong, either because we were told that we were doing something wrong, or because we ourselves feel like it's not good enough? Do we simply quit and give up on all that time, everything that we've put into it, and move on to something else? And you've seen that as well. You've seen people that start with an art and are very vocal about how great it is. Then they get to a certain point, and then they're very vocal about how much it sucks, and they bash it, and they turn it down, and they just tell whoever's willing to listen how bad it is. And then they find something else and they're like, oh my god, I'm loving it again. And oh, because I didn't understand, or I didn't know the truth, or the person that was teaching me didn't know the truth. So there's a lot to be said about the inner workings of information, who has the complete version of anything, and whether or not we received enough of it to be able to do something significant, something that would work. And regardless of what the reason is why you may feel this way, it's still a way that we feel. So how do we then move past it and overcome it? Still working on that. But I have a few ideas, or at least a few ideas have kind of popped into my head because of the way that I've been taught. First of all, the Bladed Mind, Rico, Danny, they gave me the freedom to think for myself, to interpret ideas and concepts for myself. GM Bob has left the floor quite open for my own interpretation and even my own input in the class, which I appreciate very much, because not a lot of instructors, I should take that back. A lot of the instructors I know do this, but I've heard that a lot of other instructors do not. And that is, be humble enough to actually take in criticism or suggestions for the very thing that they are teaching. And GM Bob has been very good at allowing me to share my own ideas. Because prior to meeting up with him, 8 years worth of the Bladed Mind, where we don't have specific movements or techniques. We have ideas and concepts, very basic movements that become whatever they need to become later on. And that's by design. That's why they remain simple, is so they could be interpreted. So then concepts could be attached to that. So now I'm here. I didn't do as well as I hoped I did in the application part of it, but I know my stuff. I earned my belt. I know Kaju Kempo, so where comes next? And believe it or not, I've been going through one punch art and trying to, at least in my head, adapt as many of the concepts and ideas that I've been taught in the past by not just Rick, but by other instructors. You know, you go to seminars and they teach you something, and often you hear the words, go make it your own. But how? How do you make it your own when you don't fully understand everything that's going on? And that's all I've been doing, is grafting these concepts. Like my first punch art. First of all, what is the emphasis? What is the most important part of that particular technique? Is it the avoidance? Is it the parry? Is it the block? Is it the kick? Is it breaking their center? Is it the final blow? And if I change the focus of which one of those I'm going to make the more important one, how does it change the technique itself? And first of all, would somebody actually punch the way that we uki for our fellow students to be able to do that technique? Would that punch actually come out the way that we think it is? Would somebody who doesn't know Kaju Kempo punch that way? Would they hold it out long enough for me to do what I'm going to do? And if not, then what has to change in order for that particular technique to be functional, so it could become applicable to a situation that I may not be completely aware of, or know what's going to happen next? And again, this came about because of the last few episodes on Nain's shorts, about what is your intention? How do you get to that application part? What comes next after you get to a certain point in your training? And again, one of the reasons why I feel like I'm now allowed to be a white belt is because I can finally ask these questions and have enough knowledge to say, okay, I think this is the route that I could take because these are the ideas that I came up with. Now I can test them and I can see, okay, that worked. Cool. This didn't work. Why? And I can start exploring whether or not I can come up with enough reason, and if I can't, to make it work, well, then I can ask questions. Then I can specifically say, I'm having trouble with this. How can I get better? And I can search for the answer, search for the person who has the knowledge that would be able to then fill that missing piece, and I'll be able to adapt, and I'll be able to then go back and make it work. And all these ideas are now flying in my head in reference to, okay, what do I really want to accomplish? Do I just want to hit the person? Do I want to subdue the person? Do I want to drop the person? And keeping in mind, I'm staying within just the movements of the first punch art, because I realized that it's just the right punch. If it was a left, then it would be on the reverse side. If it's a kick, well, we have responses for kicks as well. So I'm keeping it as rudimentary as possible because it's the concepts and ideas that I'm trying to graft onto this so it can become adaptive. So I can then make it work in application, which is one of the ideas that you would have to implement in order to even consider that. Would somebody actually punch that way? What would be a more realistic punch? And would that technique work in that instance? Many people would say, no, right off the bat. Some people would say, yeah, it would. But what do you do when it doesn't? How much commitment do you have to the art to work it until you can actually make it functional? Or do you have so much commitment that you don't even question it and maybe one day fail at it? How do you come back from that? These are the things that I've just been racking my brain about because, well, I'm not quitting anytime soon. I'm going to keep going, but I also want to make sure that I'm constantly improving. And I think that's one of the key elements to it all, is that none of it will actually work unless you put the time and effort into working at making it work. And I don't mean just practicing. We can go through the moves all you want and it's just repeating the moves. But what are we considering? What are we thinking about? That's the work. That's the effort. And that's the thing that we should be more consistent in. The movements are the movements. The physical is the physical. But for anyone who's ever been in a real fight or sparred enough where bruises are left and there is some pain afterwards, it's not always the same. And it's definitely not as easy as just going through the movements. There's more to it. So how much of that can we bring into our set techniques, our katas, our pinyons, and modify as needed to make them applicable? There's a lot to digest, a lot to consider, but I think I'm going in the right direction. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this where my mindset should be in reference to how do I make this stuff functional? How do I make preset movements into something that's going to help me in sparring or even beyond that in a real fight? I leave that to you guys. I hope you guys respond because I love your intake. I love your responses to it. And it really helps me learn way more than I ever could on my own or even with my teachers. As knowledgeable as they are, you know, I genuinely believe you should pull from as many sources as you possibly can. And you start hearing a lot of the same things from various sources, you start realizing, okay, maybe there's a lot to that specific thing, to that idea, that concept. I should probably focus more on that and then go on from there. But that's the journey, folks. Thank you for joining me on another one of Nain's Shorts. I hope I see you on the next one. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do. It helps out a lot. And go ahead and share. The views do help. So thank you for that. Until the next one. 3, 2, 1, cut!